Gentlelady yields back her time. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, for 5 minutes and his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Glazer, what is the current policy of the administration regarding U.S. dollars and Iran? Or U.S. dollars are hard currency, right? You characterize that as hard currency?
Yes.
And what's the current policy regarding hard currency, particularly U.S. dollars and Iran?
You cannot engage in dollar transactions with Iran.
All right, so we're trying to ensure that they don't get hard currency, particularly U.S. dollars, right? I'm sure you're aware that Iranian's Guardian Council just approved the military budget for 2016, 2017, which increased their military budget by 90%, including $1.7 billion transferred by the U.S. Treasury in January, which allegedly has nothing to do with the prisoner swap that happened, or a U.S. hostage swap that happened literally at the same time. I'm just wondering, that transfer of $1.7 billion, what currency was that? What was that currency that was transferred?
I'd have to go back and find the answer out to that for you.
$1.7 billion. You have no idea.
No, I do not know. I do not know what currency.
All right, all right. If you would please, for the record, I would like the answer to that. You know, the fact that it's going to, it went directly to the military, to the Iranian military. At this point, looking at ISIS taking American equipment left in Iraq, and now, which, you know, paid for with American tax dollars, is it fair for me to answer my constituents who say to me, haven't we now funded both sides of this war? Is it fair to say we have, in some sense? I mean, it's not a gotcha question, but I mean, literally, haven't we essentially funded both sides of this war?
No, I don't think that would be a fair thing to say.
Why not?
I think that we are doing everything that we can to attack ISIL's finances. I think.
Wait. ISIS has American paid-for equipment, military equipment, paid for by the American taxpayers, right? So they're on one side of the operation. Now, we just gave $1.7 billion to Iran in some currency. We don't know right now what that is. At least you don't know. And they're using it. They sent it directly to the military, increased their military spending this year by 90%. That's on the other side. How is this not the American taxpayer being on both sides of this fight?
So ISIL got its hands on a lot of U.S. military equipment when they won battles in an ongoing war. I don't think it would be accurate to say that the United States is providing ISIL military equipment.
Well, it wasn't the Russians.
It would be accurate to
wasn't
say
the Chinese.
The United States is actively engaged in military operations against ISIL.
Let me ask you, with this $1.7 billion payment to Iran, essentially at this very same time, 5 U.S. hostages were sent home, and the perception from Americans that it was payment and ransom, and as stated by Iran, that it was paid for. They called them spies, not hostages. Doesn't this undermine our policy that we would hope other nations would take to not pay ransoms? How do we have the moral authority to request that they not pay ransom when it appears to anybody who's looking that we have paid $1.7 billion to Iran for 5 hostages?
Yes, I understand the question. The fact of the matter is that was not a ransom paid for hostages. We have been very consistent in our policy of no payment of ransom for hostages, and this is something that we've worked very closely with countries on around the world to ensure that there's a global agreement, a global consensus that payment of ransom for hostages is not an appropriate response to the problem.
So if we pay and we get hostages at the same time and we just say we didn't, then that equates to it not being that. Essentially suspend reality and just say, well, it's 2 different things. I mean, that's rhetorical. I apologize. Mr. Keller, Huala, if you can tell us anything you know about what we're doing about Huala being used for illicit purposes, particularly to fund terrorism, what you're doing, and if you have any ideas of how the U.S. Congress can help in that effort.
Thank you, Congressman. I think in the counter-ISIL context, for example, one of the most important things that we've been trying to do all along is make sure that ISIL is cut off from the financial system, whether it's formal financial system or informal financial system. I think through a lot of good work from, including from our Treasury Department, early on, they worked very closely with the Iraqis to cut off banks that were in ISIL-controlled territory from the international financial system. In addition, we've been working with the Iraqis to cut off money exchange houses and more informal operations that are engaged in Hawala-type activities that are in ISIL-controlled territory from their ability to participate.
But it's not
in
just
dollar
ISIL-related. Hawala is used for various measures by numerous countries, not just ISIL and not just Iraq. So is there anything that the Congress can do in that regard that we haven't done already?
Well, sir, I think you're exactly right that it is not just ISIL-related. And I can tell you, if you indulge me, I'll tell you one other thing that the State Department is doing, which I mentioned earlier, which are these capacity building programs that increase the capacity for other countries on anti-money laundering and counterterrorism finance programs, whether it's in their judiciary or prosecutorial services. These are things that can be very helpful, and we also work with Treasury departments around the world. These are things that can be very helpful.
One final question in
helping
that
them
vein, if the
monitor.
chairman will indulge me. Do you have any way to quantify when you say they can be helpful? So the American people are going to pay a certain amount to aid these other countries. How do we quantify the results? How do we quantify what we paid for and what we got? Is there any way?
That's a great question, Congressman. I would like to take that back and get you an answer in writing, and I'll discuss that.
Look forward
with
to your
capacity
response.
building
Mr.
experts.
Chairman, I yield.